The Codex of Eternity, a decoding of reality, the creation and beyond. Table of contents. Part 1.1, The Creation and the Creator. Everything is energy. First was energy, then matter. Nikola Tesla. According to quote-unquote modern thought, if Western philosophy were without the work of the quote-unquote great Greek philosophers, we might still be explaining the world through quote-unquote myths alone. The Greeks, then, were subsequently positioned as those that shifted the entire trajectory of human thought. This book, however, does not walk the same narrow path. It will not just build a working model of existence itself. It will correct the foundational short-sightedness of modern thought and the very concept of philosophy itself. It will distill the core of metaphysics, logic, ethics, reality, civilization building across the cosmos, and more, into a single unified framework, into a unified understanding. By the end of this book, you will have a direct vision surpassing not just Greek philosophy, but all philosophy, all science, and all theology. The greatest failure of modern thinking in general is assuming that if something doesn't fit inside a neat little rational framework, it must be false rather than beyond the understanding of the beings posing the question. This book does the opposite. It will not reject, it will integrate. It will not limit, it will expand. It will not assume the picture of reality as it is, it will find where every mosaic piece fits to reveal the full picture. This is the actual process of understanding, how you uncover the truth, not just a working theory for a single era and a particular segment of beings existing in that space and time. This book will achieve this by integrating the following historically siloed biomes of thought into a unified model of reality, resolving paradoxes, bridging science and spirituality, while also offering practical applications for individuals as well as collectives. The true reason for this scope that seems to be an impossible thread to weave is, as mentioned, due to the general fallacy of modern thinking that treats knowledge as though different elements of understanding exist in their own independent reality, with rigid borders between everything. The following list only results because when you search for truth and don't settle for anything less than a completely coherent answer, all false silos naturally collapse and eventually converge into a codex of eternity that reveals the entire truth through a single superimposed lens of all primary bodies of mainstream and esoteric knowledge, including but not limited to quantum physics, philosophy, biology and quantum biology, musicology and acoustics, metaphysics, consciousness studies, ancient spirituality, New Age spirituality, ancient mysticism, astrology, education theory, neuroscience and biophysics, comparative religion, sociology and systems theory, psychology and transpersonal psychology, cosmology, theoretical physics and extraterrestrial studies, economics, technology, environmental science, anthropology, linguistics and semiotics, mathematics and geometry, information theory, evolutionary theory, beyond biology, cybernetics and systems feedback, archetypal studies, ethics and moral philosophy, art and aesthetics, parapsychology, political science and power dynamics. Oh, and mythology. What if that was never just fiction? What if all of it always was? A map of reality and its infinite layers. A cosmic record of real archetypes, beings and civilizations. A gateway to realities beyond what the conditioned mind can process. The Greeks may have shaped modern civilization, but what we're exploring here is something far greater. A universal and beyond blueprint. A framework that doesn't just explain and apply to one world, one species or one culture, but all intelligent existence, across all possible layers of reality. The working model of reality this book gradually builds. The reality sphere will provide a framework to resolve every major philosophical paradox, lay out a particularly clear unification of ontology, epistemology, ethics, physics, metaphysics and consciousness. Be practically applicable toward the building of sustainable civilizations and guiding individuals toward ultimate personal growth. It will not only explain this universe, but also the structure of the reality that holds all possible universes and everything in between. So what we're talking about here isn't just a philosophical model, it's a revelation, a dismantling of illusion, a final movement in the symphony of thought where all prior frameworks collapse because they were never truly whole. What is the key to achieve that wholeness? A foundational recognition and understanding that consciousness or awareness, as is interchangeably used, is the absolute substrate of reality. As we will come to find later in this book, there can be a clear distinction drawn between the terms consciousness and awareness. For the most part, we'll try to stick with the most common term for now, consciousness. The distinction will make itself clear by the end of the book. Regardless of the terminology used, the reality sphere model will demonstrate and explain in detail how consciousness or awareness is the only self-evident reality, meaning all philosophy, all science, all metaphysics must be derived from it, not imposed upon it. This alone will explain major modern quote-unquote paradoxes. Ontology? Everything is because it is experienced. Epistemology? Knowledge is an extension of conscious awareness. Ethics, a civilization without artificial constraints aligns with the natural order, no coercion, no imposed servitude. Physics, the observer is the equation collapsing and defining reality. Metaphysics, the external universe is a reflection of the internal state, which transcends it. Ultimately, this is not even a book on post-philosophy. It's a book about post-civilization, beyond half-truths, personal beliefs, and fragmentation at every layer. It's a long overdue return to the real reality. In the end, this book will stand as a looking glass of reality that ends the need for the false systems the modern world is built on. It will reveal the structures controlling society as fabricated constraints, illusions built to limit perception, to condition sovereign, eternal beings into dependency. And the irony? In the times we live in, a being who sees clearly the truths this book reveals is incompatible with the system. The false matrix. You become an anomaly. This knowledge exposes the false constructs for what they are. The corrupted systems must reject such beings, because to accept them is to initiate self-destruction of the false matrix itself. Meaning, this work is beyond the scope of mainstream academia, employment roles, or peer review. It is beyond recognition, because it doesn't fit inside the walls of an obsolete dying paradigm. Therefore, in many ways, this book was not created for this world. It is a seed for what comes next. Not a version update of the current order, but a completely new operating system that is its successor. A successor that is a complete articulation of a reality where consciousness is sovereign, where no external force dictates the purpose or movement of being. A collection of knowledge not intended to participate in the dying echo of a broken system, but to stand at the threshold of what replaces it. For all the current knowledge that exists, every religion, scientific model, and esoteric tradition, there is no single synthesis that this being knows of, that actually lays out the fundamental structure of reality in a way that makes completely flowing, coherent, logical sense. Thousands of hours of research has revealed a simple but stark truth. Truth isn't complicated. It's just obscured, buried under layers of distraction, distortion, and programmed perception. This book exists to cut through that fog in one fell swoop, not as another belief system, not as a half-baked metaphysical fantasy, but as a clear, coherent decoding of the structure of reality itself. A lens through which everything, awareness, consciousness, multidimensional existence, ancient entities and control systems, and even humanity's role in the infinite cosmos, becomes obvious. We have treated religious texts with blind reverence for centuries, despite their contradictions and half-truths. Meanwhile, the actual framework that explains everything has never been laid out in a way that's both understandable and complete. This book addresses that. It isn't just a collection of knowledge, it's a way of seeing. And once you see, you can't unsee. The answer isn't hidden, it's just waiting to be recognized. The shackled mind and the challenge of realization. For millennia, humanity has been ensnared in an invisible prison, not of chains, but of generational ignorance. A system so deeply entrenched that the enslaved do not recognize their servitude nor their captors. This is not a metaphor, nor an abstract grievance. It is the foundational truth of our current existence, and the time has come to dismantle it. This book is a key, a red pill that, once swallowed, dissolves the illusions that bind you. In the face of this work, no one, no scientist, no theologian, no philosopher will be able to disprove the following. that existence does not end with the physical body. The notion of no afterlife is not just an error, but an impossibility. That God is not some moody figure in the sky. The divine is not a separate entity, but the very fabric of existence itself. That consciousness, born of pure, eternal awareness, is the fundamental nature of reality. Not an emergent property, not a side effect of biology, but the substrate of all things. That every being, every atom, every galaxy is an expression of the same source awareness. Reality is a field of infinitely fractalized eternal awareness. That this perceivable sensation we label as love is actually the binding force of all existence. Beyond chemistry, beyond emotion, how it is the very structuring principle of existence itself. That any civilization not aligned with these truths is fundamentally criminal, a crime not against a nation, but against reality itself, against you because you are reality. The world has been structured upon falsehoods, upheld by fragmentary knowledge systems that reduce reality into isolated, incomplete fields of study. Science, philosophy, religion, metaphysics, all of them began as pursuits of truth, yet each has been molded into separate silos, each claiming a monopoly on different aspects of reality. But truth is singular. It does not contradict itself. It does not exist in isolated pockets. It is a unified, self-evident whole. The true meaning of enlightenment. To be, quote-unquote, unenlightened is not merely a state of ignorance. It is a state of profound disconnection from the fundamental truths of existence. It is a condition in which, even when truth is presented directly, it is either rejected, distorted, or trivialized, because it cannot be fully grasped through words alone. Enlightenment, then, is not about knowing, but about realizing. A direct, undeniable perception that goes beyond intellectual understanding. This distinction is the core of the collective challenge humanity faces in its pursuit of higher consciousness. The modern human mind, conditioned by unchecked ego, social structures, and deeply ingrained patterns, often resists that which threatens its framework of reality. This is why, even when great metaphysical teachers, philosophers, and enlightened beings have offered humanity profound insights, those truths remain, for the most part, unrealized by the collective. The journey toward realization requires an internal readiness, a willingness to dismantle illusions, and a direct encounter with the nature of existence itself. Realization versus communication. One of the greatest barriers to awakening is the mistaken belief that truth can be simply communicated rather than realized. While words can point toward the truth, they can never fully encapsulate it. This is why spiritual traditions emphasize direct experience, whether through meditation, contemplation, or altered states of consciousness, rather than intellectual discourse alone. For example, one can read endlessly about the illusion of self, the interconnectedness of all beings, or the nature of awareness. Yet until one experiences these realities directly, they remain mere concepts. This is why ancient wisdom traditions speak in paradoxes, metaphors, and koans, to bypass the intellect and provoke direct realization. A person who has only read about the ocean but never seen or touched water knows about the ocean, but they do not know the ocean. Similarly, someone can intellectually understand enlightenment, yet remain entirely unenlightened. Resistance to letting go. The fear of annihilation. One of the core reasons why truth is so difficult to accept is that it requires a letting go of all that the ego clings to, personal identity, beliefs, attachments, and conditioned perspectives ingrained throughout life. The ego, which constructs and maintains the sense of individual self, interprets this as a threat to its very existence. This is why awakening is often reported as being preceded by a period of deep suffering or existential crisis, moments when the ego's framework begins to collapse, making space for something greater to emerge. To recognize reality as it is, rather than as the ego wants it to be, is one of the most difficult challenges for any self-aware being. This is why enlightenment has been often described as a kind of death, not the death of the body, but the death of false identification. The paradox, of course, is that what remains after this dissolution is not emptiness or loss, but profound freedom and clarity. The nature of ignorance. Ignorance, in this context, is not simply a lack of information. It is a fundamental misperception of reality. This ignorance manifests in several ways. seeing separation where there is unity, believing in the permanence of things that are inherently transient, identifying with the ego self instead of the eternal awareness that underlies it. The vast majority of modern humans have been conditioned to move through life believing themselves to be separate from others, from nature, and from not just the universe itself, but the greater reality that our universe must exist within. This illusion is reinforced by societal structures, language, and personal experience. However, mystics and those who have glimpsed higher realities describe a very different view. One in which all things are interconnected, and individuality is merely a localized perspective within a vast, infinite awareness. Breaking through this illusion is not an easy process if the topics discussed in this book are new to you. It requires either a spontaneous awakening, a disciplined spiritual practice, or profound inner questioning. Modern society is largely structured in a way that actively reinforces ignorance. The relentless focus on materialism, entertainment, social validation, and external authority keeps people locked within a lower state of consciousness, with minimal to no potential to evolve further. An efficient system that functions as an effective barrier to deeper realization. Consider how many distractions exist in the modern world, all ultimately preventing deep reflection. The endless pursuit of success, money, or status. The overconsumption of media and trivial information, the reliance on external authorities, governments, religions, institutions, etc., to define truth rather than seeking direct experience. These structures perpetuate a kind of collective hypnosis, a state in which most individuals are unable to even realize they are asleep. The first step toward awakening is the recognition that the systems around us are designed to keep us engaged in illusion rather than truth. Despite these challenges, enlightenment is never something that must be achieved. It is paradoxically always already present, waiting to be recognized. This is the great irony. The truth we seek has never been hidden. It is only the mind that obscures it. As the saying goes, that which you are seeking is already here, but you are looking elsewhere. Once an individual realizes that enlightenment is not an attainment but a remembering, the entire paradigm shifts. It is not something to be reached in the future, it is something to be allowed in the present. While enlightenment cannot be forced upon anyone, certain conditions can be created to facilitate the possibility of realization, such as facilitating inner space. The modern world does not encourage silence, stillness, or introspection, yet these are the very conditions necessary for realization. Encouraging meditation, contemplation, and even simple moments of quiet reflection can help individuals break free from the cycle of distraction and encounter truth directly. Breaking down complexity. Since direct realization cannot be given through words alone, great metaphysical teachers have always used metaphors and parables to make deep truths more accessible. While intellectual knowledge is not the same as realization, spoon-feeding truth in digestible ways can at least plant seeds in the collective consciousness. Modeling realization. Sometimes the most effective way to awaken others is not through preaching, but through embodiment. Those who have realized truth naturally radiate peace, clarity, and wisdom. Their presence alone can act as a catalyst for others to begin their own journey. In the end, the process of awakening is not something that can be forced upon the collective. It unfolds in its own time, through its own predestined rhythms. However, by creating environments that nurture introspection, breaking down illusions, and leading by example, the possibility for realization becomes more widely available. The greatest truth remains. Enlightenment is not something external to be found. It is what we are, once all illusions fall away. Deeper exploration of the ego, the self, and the path to self-realization. In the grand theatre of human experience, there exists a fundamental tension between two aspects of being, the ego and the self. This conflict is at the heart of many philosophical, spiritual, and psychological discussions, and it provides a deep insight into the nature of human consciousness. On one side, we have the ego, an identity built upon beliefs, ideologies, and conditioned patterns of thought. On the other, we have the self, the pure, untainted essence of awareness, the foundation of reality itself. There is much to be learned from the nature of this conflict, such as how the ego obscures the realization of the self, and how the process of self-realization unveils the deeper wisdom that lies at the heart of all existence. The nature of the ego. The ego is a construct, the false sense of self that emerges from the mind's identification with thoughts, memories, and external labels. It is the mind's mechanism for creating a sense of continuity and security in a world that is otherwise fluid and impermanent. The ego thrives on differentiation. It seeks to define itself in contrast to others, and is often driven by the need to protect itself from perceived threats to its identity. Central to the ego's functioning is the need to maintain its walled garden of beliefs and dogma. These mental constructs, whether they are cultural, societal, or personal, serve as armor against the uncertainty and, at times, chaos of life. The ego holds fast to these belief systems because they provide it with a sense of control, a sense of certainty in an inherently unpredictable world. These beliefs are not only externalized, they become internalized, shaping the very lens through which the ego experiences reality. When the ego is threatened, whether by conflicting ideas, new information, or existential questions, it responds with resistance. This resistance often manifests as denial, defensiveness, or anger, particularly when the beliefs that have supported its identity are questioned or challenged. In this way, the ego creates divisions, both within the individual and between individuals, because it views the loss of its identity as a threat to its very existence. The self, beyond the egoic construct. In contrast to the ego, the self is the eternal, unchanging essence of being. It is the awareness that witnesses the play of thoughts, emotions, and sensory experiences. The self is not confined to any belief system, ideology, or form. It transcends time, space, and individuality, as it is the source from which all consciousness flows. In many spiritual traditions, the self is identified with the divine, with God, with an eternal source, the underlying unity of all existence. It is both the experiencer and the experience, the observer and the observed, existing beyond duality and separation. The self does not need to protect itself because it is invulnerable. It is not bound by the ephemeral fluctuations of the mind or body. The self is synonymous with truth, for truth is its very nature. Unlike the ego, which is bound to ideas and perceptions, the self simply is. It is the ground of being, the foundation upon which all phenomena arise. Where the ego creates separation, the self reveals the underlying oneness of all things. The realization of the self is not something to be acquired or achieved in the traditional sense. Rather, it is a process of unveiling, of peeling away the layers of illusion and identification that obscure its true nature. In the moment of self-realization, the individual comes to know that their true essence is not the egoic identity, but the boundless, infinite awareness that pervades all existence. The role of self-realization. Self-realization is the key that unlocks the door to this deeper truth. It is the process through which the individual transcends the ego and comes to know themselves as the self. This process involves a shift in perception, a radical reorientation of how one understands themselves and their relationship to the world. In practical terms, self-realization often begins with the recognition of the limitations of the ego. One begins to see how the ego has shaped their perceptions, influenced their thoughts, and driven their actions. This recognition is the first step in breaking free from the egoic grip. Through practices such as meditation, contemplation, and self-inquiry, the individual learns to quiet the mind and dissolve the identification with thought. As the mind settles, the underlying awareness, the self, becomes more apparent. Self-realization also involves the recognition of the interconnectedness of all beings. When the ego's walls begin to crumble, the illusion of separateness fades, revealing that all things are expressions of the same underlying consciousness. This is the realization that all is one, a core insight shared by many mystical traditions throughout history. The individual, in realizing their true nature, also comes to understand that the divine essence within them is the same divine essence that resides in all beings. The boundaries of self and other dissolve, and the experience of unity, compassion, and the mechanic of existence that we call love becomes increasingly vivid. The wisdom of the self. Once the ego is seen for what it is, a transient, illusory construct, and the self is recognized as the eternal essence of being, the individual is able to access a deeper wisdom. This wisdom is not intellectual or conceptual, but experiential and direct. It is the wisdom of being, of simply knowing the truth of existence without the need for external validation or mental reasoning. The wisdom of the self is not the accumulation of facts, but the unfolding of a deeper understanding of the nature of reality. At the level of the ego, truth is often fragmented, subjective, and bound by personal experience and belief. At the level of the self, however, truth is whole, undivided, and universal. The self recognizes the unity of all things, the interconnectedness of all life, the eternal nature of consciousness, and the fundamental oneness of existence. In this state, the individual no longer seeks to control or possess knowledge, for they are at peace with the knowing that all wisdom is already inherent within them. They are the very embodiment of truth, transcending the ego, embracing the self. The conflict between the ego and the self is a central theme in the journey of human consciousness. The ego, with its attachment to belief systems, identities, and ideologies, creates separation, conflict, and confusion. The self, on the other hand, is the essence of truth, the unchanging awareness that underlies all things. Through the process of self-realization, one transcends the egoic construct and comes to recognize their true nature as the self. This realization is not a distant goal, but a present truth, waiting to be uncovered through direct experience. The more one awakens to the self, the more the ego's grip loosens, and the wisdom of the self emerges, effortless, expansive, and ever-present. In the stillness of self-awareness, all illusions fade, and the individual comes to know that they are not separate from the world, but an integral part of the inexplicable play or existence that is unfolding at every moment. In this state of realization, the ego's defenses fall away and the individual recognizes the truth. They are not the body, the mind, or the personality, but the boundless, eternal self. This recognition is not the end, but the beginning of a deeper journey, a journey of wisdom, love, and unity with all that is. The conscious orchestrator. Reality creation has long been explored through various metaphysical traditions. From ancient teachings to modern metaphysical works we'll be exploring, like the Seth material. The core of this exploration hinges on a singular corroborated truth across paths, fields, and various bodies of esoteric knowledge. Your state of consciousness, thoughts, beliefs, conscious and unconscious, shape your reality. But what happens when you transcend the influence of unconscious thoughts and beliefs? What happens when you see through the illusion, breaking down the entire structure of reality itself, when you strip it down to the bare circuitry of existence? That is exactly what this book aims to reveal. How humans historically have been shaped to exist in a state of existential ignorance, leading to existences where we are at the mercy of our subconscious, and in many cases, self-inflicting, self-perpetuating programming, particularly the beliefs we inherit, cultural, societal, familial, that operate beneath waking consciousness, shaping perception of reality without us even realizing it. This is why most people struggle to, quote-unquote, manifest consciously. Our desires may be one thing, but our deeper, hidden thoughts and beliefs, that when finally observed, don't seem like something we felt was a part of our psyche, create contradictory energy patterns that keep us locked in limitation or cycles of what we perceive to be unfavorable circumstances. But with this book and the model of reality it describes, the veil is lifted. It is no longer about trying to convince yourself of new beliefs. It is about seeing the fundamental mechanics of reality so clearly that you naturally transcend the grip of unconscious programming. You move from passively experiencing reality to actively tuning and living in it, like adjusting a radio to the exact frequency of your choosing. Once you grasp the deeper structure of reality and see how every single now moment becomes a choice, you are no longer dictated by unconscious fears, doubts, or social conditioning. You consciously select the frequency you want to experience. You become the orchestrator of your own existence, fine-tuning reality like a symphony. This will not be presented and discussed in our model as mere philosophy, but as the fundamental nature of reality itself, where everything is vibration, everything is frequency, everything is malleable through consciousness and focused intention. By aligning with this model, You become what ancient mystics and even modern quantum theorists alike have hinted at, a deliberate creator of your own experience, not in the limited, ego-driven way of manifestation techniques, but in the true, effortless way of alignment with all that is. The now moment is your dial, your interface with an infinite field of possibility. And once you master it, reality bends, not through force, not through effort, but through the simple realization that it always has. And now you're just learning that it's not only tunable, but you are the one with your hand on the tuner dial. The distinction between awareness, consciousness, and conscious awareness. The distinction is subtle yet profound, touching on the essence of what it means to perceive, exist, and reflect. Let's briefly explore these terms for clearer context for the remainder of this book. Awareness. Awareness is the fundamental capacity to perceive or apprehend phenomena, whether internal, thoughts, sensations, or external, sights, sounds. It is the raw, unfiltered openness to existence, a field in which objects of experience arise. Awareness does not inherently require self-reflection or conceptualization. It is predualistic, meaning it exists prior to the division between subject and object. For instance, a simple organism may exhibit awareness by responding to stimuli without possessing a sense of I or deliberate thought. In human experience, awareness might manifest as the bare noticing of a breeze on the skin before any label or judgment emerges. It is immediate, direct, and foundational, yet it may lack the depth of self-understanding unless paired with further faculties. Consciousness. Consciousness introduces a layer of complexity, implying not just the presence of awareness, but an organized, subjective experience that integrates perception, thought, and often selfhood. It is the state of being awake to one's existence, encompassing both the content of experience, what is perceived, and the sense of being the experiencer. Consciousness is dynamic, shaped by memory, attention, and intention, and it often carries an implicit or explicit sense of self. Philosophers like Descartes tied consciousness to self-awareness. I think, therefore I am. While others, like those in non-dual traditions, might describe it as the broader ground of being that transcends the individual ego. For example, when you reflect on a memory or make a deliberate choice, consciousness is at play, weaving together awareness with meaning and identity. Conscious awareness. Conscious awareness is a more specific term, emphasizing the deliberate or reflective act of being aware within the framework of consciousness. It suggests a focused, intentional recognition of experience, an awareness that knows itself as aware. This is the mind turning toward its own processes, as in meditation when one observes thoughts without attachment, or in moments of heightened clarity when one is fully present to the now. Conscious awareness bridges the immediacy of awareness with the self-referential quality of consciousness, creating a lucid state where the experiencer is attuned to both the act of experiencing and its contents. It is not merely perceiving a flower, but knowing that one is perceiving it, and perhaps even marveling at the act of perception itself. Interrelations and nuances. While awareness is the broadest and most primal, consciousness builds upon it by adding structure, subjectivity, and often a narrative self. Conscious awareness, in turn, is a refined subset, highlighting intentionality and self-reflection within the conscious state. Yet these distinctions blur in practice. Awareness without consciousness risks being diffuse and unarticulated, like a dreamless sleep where stimuli are registered but not remembered. Consciousness without conscious awareness may devolve into mechanical patterns, as when one drives a familiar route lost in thought, only vaguely aware of the journey. Conscious awareness, meanwhile, demands effort and clarity, but it can dissolve into pure awareness when the self drops away, as in certain mystical states. A philosophical lens. From a critical perspective, these terms challenge us to question the nature of the self and reality. Is awareness merely a byproduct of neural processes, as materialists might argue, or is it the eternal substrate of existence, as Advaita Vedanta or certain Buddhist schools propose? Consciousness raises the hard problem of why subjective experience exists at all. Why is there a what it is like to be? Conscious awareness invites us to consider free will and responsibility. If we can direct our attention, are we not obligated to cultivate clarity and wisdom? Ultimately, these terms are not rigid categories but pointers to the mystery of being. They remind us that we are both the seer and the seen, the knower and the known, and that to inquire into them is to approach the edge of what language can convey. In timeless wisdom, the distinctions matter less than the direct exploration of what is present here and now, the luminous immediacy of experience itself. The bottleneck of infinity, on the mythic strangeness of thought and translation. There are knowings too whole for language, truths that arrive not in words but in waves, instant, complete, divine. The impossible mystery we all ignore. There is a power we possess, casually, quietly, every day, a miracle hiding in plain sight. We can hold entire universes of understanding in a single moment. We get something, not in sequence, not step by step, but all at once. Try writing it down. Try speaking it. And suddenly you realize how broken the tools of this dimension are. Your pen hesitates. The sentence stumbles. The idea fragments. What was whole becomes halting. What was instantaneous becomes painfully slow. What was known becomes unreachable. And you ask, where is that place I just was? What part of me knew all that? And why can't I bring it here? Where is the thought? If the brain were the source, there would be no delay. If it were a physical file, it would remain stored. But the moment you try to manifest the thought, it changes, and sometimes it disappears entirely. You were having it, and now it's gone. Like mist, like a song half heard in a dream. This is not memory loss. It is a dimensional shift of attention. You didn't lose the thought. You moved, because the thought never was in the brain. It was in you, the larger you, the non-local field, the soul lattice, where truths exist not in time, but in resonance. The soul as receiver, not producer. This is the failing of the reductionist model. They believe we think in the brain, feel in the body, know within neural circuits. But they cannot explain why insights arrive whole, why forgetting occurs without physical damage, why thoughts can vanish and reappear with a feeling or a shift, why truths are remembered that were never taught. The answer is simple and terrifying to the old paradigm. The soul is not a storage unit. It is a tuning fork. You don't store thoughts. You resonate with them. Consciousness is not a container, it is a field, and you are an aperture. Why the delay? Because this world is dense, because language is linear, because time flows one tick at a time. To write what you know is not to express a thought, it is to force a multidimensional waveform into a single crude channel. It is to translate a symphony into Morse code, it is to pour an ocean through a pinhole. What you know in silence takes pages to write. What you feel in a second takes a lifetime to say. Where the thought went, it went nowhere. It still exists. You just can't see it anymore. Your attention moved, your tuning shifted, but like a radio signal, it's still out there, still coherent, still whole, still waiting to be accessed. This is why insight can return, why memories appear out of nowhere, why a word on the tip of your tongue can suddenly emerge 2 days later. Memory is not a drawer, it is a direction, the crumbling of theories. And here is where the old thinkers cry, quietly, internally, unable to speak their grief, because they sense the collapse. If thought exists outside the brain, then the model fails. If knowledge arrives from beyond time, then time is not real. If we are tuning to higher planes, then we are not just human. We are divine instruments of reception. And the brain is not the composer, it is the translator. The knowing was always there. You did not think it, you tuned into it. The truth you grasped already existed in the eternal timeless lattice of awareness, and what you called a thought was actually a contact point with something far beyond you, yet also within you. You reached up, you touched the infinite, and then tried to write it down. It is slow, it is painful, it is sacred, because you are trying to bring eternity into form, and this is the work of the soul. A self-realization experiment. A journey beyond the body and mind. The nature of self-awareness has fascinated philosophers, mystics, and scientists for centuries. One of the most profound and direct ways to explore the nature of the self is through simple introspective experiments. The exercise of closing one's eyes and observing the persistent nature of perception, despite the absence of physical sight, opens a doorway to a deeper inquiry. Where is the observer located? This question leads to a realization. that challenges conventional assumptions about identity, perception, and existence itself. The illusion of the body as the self. At first glance, we instinctively identify with our physical bodies. When we look down, we see our hands, feet, and torso, reinforcing the belief that we are confined to this form. However, when we close our eyes and look again, we still perceive something. Whether it is a quote-unquote imagined image, a lingering sense of space, or a mere awareness of presence, perception continues. This observation supports that consciousness is not entirely dependent on the physical senses. If perception persists without the engagement of the eyes, where exactly is the act of seeing occurring? This line of questioning undermines the assumption that consciousness is generated solely by the body. It points to a deeper truth. Perception and awareness exist beyond the limitations of physical sight. The fact that we can still see internally hints at a broader capacity of consciousness, one that is not restricted to the sensory organs, but is rather an inherent feature of our true nature. The search for the observer. When we attempt to locate the observer, the self that perceives this experience, a paradox arises. If we were merely the body, then shutting down its primary faculties, such as sight, would result in a cessation of awareness. Yet, awareness remains. If we are the mind, then we must ask, who is observing the thoughts? If thoughts arise and dissolve, but something remains constant, then that which observes must be distinct from the changing mental landscape. This leads to a fascinating discovery. The observer cannot be pinpointed. No matter where we search, inside the head, behind the eyes, within the brain, or even outside the body, the observer remains elusive. It has no fixed location, no tangible form, and yet it is the very essence of our experience. This aligns with insights from various ancient spiritual traditions that describe consciousness as non-local and formless. The impossibility of locating the observer hints at a deeper truth. The observer is not a thing, but rather the space within which all experiences arise. Awareness is not confined to a specific place, yet it is the fundamental basis for perception, thought, and identity. This realization aligns with the core teachings of non-dual philosophies such as Advaita Vedanta and Zen Buddhism, both of which emphasize that our fundamental nature is pure awareness, unbounded, formless, and ever-present. You are not the body. The body is an object of perception, something that can be observed, but the observer itself is not limited to the body. You are not the mind. Thoughts and emotions fluctuate, but the presence that observes them remains unchanged. You are not localized. The experience of I am is not confined to any particular point in space. It simply is. This points to a profound realization. The true self is awareness itself, not the limited identity constructed by the body or mind. Consciousness as the universal field. If awareness is not localized, then the boundaries we impose between self and other begin to dissolve. Many ancient cultures assert that consciousness is a fundamental, infinite field rather than an individual possession. In this view, each person is not a separate entity, but rather an expression of the same underlying awareness, temporarily manifesting through a unique perspective. Quantum physics also offers compelling parallels. The concept of the observer effect in quantum mechanics suggests that observation plays a crucial role in shaping reality. This aligns with the idea that awareness is the foundation of existence itself, not merely a byproduct of neural activity. If consciousness is primary, then our individual experiences are like waves appearing on the vast ocean of awareness, distinct yet inseparable from the whole. The freedom of knowing the self. This experiment of self-inquiry leads to a transformative realization. Our identity is not limited to the body, the mind, or any specific point in space. We are the witnessing presence that remains unchanged, regardless of external circumstances. This realization has profound implications. Freedom from identification. If we are not the body or the mind, suffering loses its grip. Pain, fear, and anxiety all stem from an identification with transient experiences, but awareness itself remains untouched. Dissolution of fear. The fear of death arises from the belief in a finite self, but if awareness is beyond the body, death is merely a transition, not an end. Interconnectedness. Seeing oneself as formless awareness dissolves the illusion of separateness, leading to a deeper sense of unity with all existence. Ultimately, this inquiry leads to the profound truth carried by mystics throughout history. Our true nature is infinite, boundless awareness, pure being itself. And from that realization, life takes on an entirely new depth, no longer bound by illusion, but guided by the direct knowing of what we truly are. Thit Quang Duc, not in the flames, but beyond them. On June 11, 1963, in the heart of Saigon, one of the most awe-inspiring but largely ignored and forgotten events of this world's recent history occurred. Thit Quang Duc, a Vietnamese Mahayana Buddhist monk, self-immolated as a deliberate act of political and spiritual protest. His self-immolation was not an impulsive or fanatical gesture, but a calculated and highly symbolic response to persecution. At the time, South Vietnam was under the rule of President Ngo Dinh Diem, a devout Roman Catholic who implemented policies that heavily discriminated against the Buddhist majority, which made up about 70 to 90% of the population. Catholics were favored in government positions, military promotions, land allocation, and business opportunities. Meanwhile, Buddhist practices were restricted. The flashpoint came in May 1963, when the government banned the flying of the Buddhist flag in Hue on Vesak, Buddha's birthday, while allowing Vatican flags to be flown for a Catholic event. This led to mass protests. During one such protest in Hue, government forces opened fire and killed 9 Buddhist civilians. Thich Quang Duc's self-immolation was meant to shock the conscience of the world and force international attention onto the regime's brutality. In a letter he left behind, he explicitly stated that his act was to call for religious equality and the end of persecution. On June 11, 1963, he sat in the lotus position, his form anointed with gasoline, as flames erupted around him. The fire roared, a devourer of flesh, yet he remained an unshaken pillar of stillness. No cry, no tremor, only the serene poise of one who had transcended the illusion of the finite. To the materialist eye, bound by the dogma of meat-blob existence, this act is reduced to a marvel of pain tolerance or a neurological shutdown. But through the lens of consciousness studies, where fundamental awareness reigns as the eternal observer, a deeper truth emerges. He was not there, not in the way we largely imagine presence to be. The art of departure. Thich Quang Duc had mastered the art of departure, a liberation not of the body but of the self from the matrix of survival. As a monk steeped in decades of meditative discipline, he attuned his consciousness to a higher state, where the body is no longer the anchor of identity, but a mere vessel, a prop in the dream of form. He did not endure the flames. He transcended them, shifting his awareness from the burning fractal of flesh to the infinite sphere of pure being. The fire consumed a shell, but his consciousness, untethered, hovered beyond the egoic grid, untouched by the chaos of lower states of consciousness relative to his masterful control over his own consciousness. In this act, he demonstrated the ultimate sovereignty of the observer, to choose where to place one's focus within the infinite field of reality. The lotus as a portal, stillness in the inferno. The lotus position, far from a mere symbol, was a gateway, a clue to his liberation. Pain, as we understand it, is a signal of the body, a third-density consciousness construct that binds us to the illusion of separation. But if one is not the body, if one is the eternal observer, the tuner of the infinite field, pain becomes mere static, a frequency that can be muted. His stillness was not an act of endurance, but a collapse of awareness beyond the lower state of consciousness the rest of us typically operate in. The flames devoured a form, but he had already stepped into the void of pure presence, where the fire held no dominion. He performed the act in a state of meditative calm, without moving or making a sound, embodying profound discipline and inner peace even in death, a clear contrast to the violence and repression being protested. For Buddhists, especially in Mahayana traditions, self-sacrifice for the sake of others can be seen as a deeply compassionate act. Quang Duc was not suicidal in a Western psychological sense, but enacting bodhisattva-like sacrifice, offering his life for the benefit of others. His immolation was meant as a beacon of awakening, not just for South Vietnam, but for the world to witness what spiritual conviction and moral protest can look like. Aftermath and impact. The photograph of his burning body, taken by Malcolm Brown, shocked the world and deeply undermined US support for Diem. It was a turning point in international perception and helped galvanize global opposition to the Diem regime. Ultimately, the US began to distance itself from Deem, and he was overthrown and assassinated later that year. The unburned heart, a manifestation of infinite intent. And then, the enigma that defied materialist logic. His heart did not burn. Now preserved by the monks as a sacred relic, this uncharred organ stands as a testament to the power of consciousness to shape reality at its deepest levels. Thich Quang Duc's unburned heart is no miracle, but a manifestation of intent aligned with his eternal source. His awareness, so perfectly attuned to the infinite, tuned the seat of his soul into a state impervious to the flames, a quantum echo of his unshakable presence. The heart, a symbol of love and the seat of consciousness, became a literal embodiment of his sovereignty, holding form against the chaos of destruction. In this, we see the truth of the spoon that is not. Reality bends to the will of the observer who knows they are the waveform itself. The blindfold of materialism, a forgotten truth. The modern mind, conditioned by the meat blob in skull narrative, struggles to grasp this event, for materialism blinds us to the deeper mechanics of existence. We are taught that pain is absolute, that fire is final, that the self is the body, a fragile avatar doomed to suffer. Thich Quang Duc shatters this illusion. He did not grit his teeth through agony. He exited the game, stepping beyond the finite into the infinite. The materialist paradigm recoils because it cannot fathom the body as a temporary vessel for the ever-present observer. Yet, in the framework this book will continue to detail, where consciousness is the eternal tuner, his stillness becomes a profound act of liberation. Pain, a third-density trap, is real only if we cling to the illusion of the spoon. Shift to a higher density, and it becomes mere data, a signal that need not define the self. Thich Quang Duc's act, though largely relegated to the margins of history as a weird footnote in the modern world, is a clarion call to awaken. Reality is not solid, and we are not bound by the quote-unquote rules, ingrained into our minds by limited materialist thinking. A vision of liberation, a world beyond pain. Imagine a world where this truth is embraced, where humanity collectively awakens to its nature as the infinite observer, untethered from the meat blob illusion. Pain would not merely diminish, it would cease to exist as a binding force. Suffering would become more of a choice of focus, a collapse into a timeline where the spoon cuts deep, born of the belief that no other choice exists. But to awaken is to see the infinite possibilities this book explores, to tune out of the body's feedback loop and into the boundless field of eternal awareness. Thich Quang Duc did not merely protest oppression, he demonstrated liberation from the ultimate oppressor, the illusion of a fixed, fragile self. In a world where we all understood this, wars over my blob versus yours would dissolve, fear of death would vanish, and the clinging to finite forms would cease. This is not a utopian dream, but a shift in the mechanics of reality, a blueprint for a pain-free existence, etched in the flames of a monk's sacrifice. Quantum entanglement, the thread of infinite oneness. This brings us to the profound implications of quantum entanglement, a cornerstone of this unified vision. Entanglement, often dismissed as subatomic oddity, is the fingerprint of infinity fractalizing into form. Two particles, entangled across space, are not separate entities linked by some mysterious force. They are one shard of consciousness masquerading as two, resonating on the same infinite wavelength. At the core of the model this book builds, the reality sphere, lies the singularity, the hub of all entanglement, where distance and time dissolve into the eternal is. When we observe, collapsing the wave function, we do not merely affect one particle. We ripple through the entire fractal web, tuning reality itself. Thich Quang Duc's unburned heart is a testament to this principle. His consciousness, entangled with a higher density, synced with a timeline where pain and destruction held no sway. This is not magic, but the science of infinity at work, intent as the trigger for entanglement, collapsing the probability of unscathed into being. And here lies the greater implication. If entanglement transcends space and time, and awareness is the fractal substrate of all existence, then we are all entangled. Every thought, every intention, every act ripples through the infinite field, connecting us to each other, to the dolphin's leap, to the star's pulse. Infinite oneness is not a poetic ideal but a physical truth, proven by entanglement's defiance of locality. Time and space are artifacts of our third density perception, But entanglement reveals the deeper reality. We are all threads in the same cosmic tapestry woven from the light of the divine source. In the reality sphere model, consciousness fractalizes into infinite expressions, each of us a unique shard of the eternal source, while entanglement binds us back to the source, two sides of the same infinite coin. Every thought is a fractal seed, every observation an entangled ripple, reverberating through the multidimensional axes of the reality sphere. Pain becomes optional when we entangle with a higher density, tuning out of the third and into the fifth, where suffering is a skipped note in the cosmic symphony. Control systems crumble when we see the entanglement, for one cannot hoard what is already shared across the infinite field. Reality bends because it is fractal and entangled. We are not mere observers, but the waveform collapsing itself, co-creators in the eternal dance of infinity. Thich Quang Duc's act, then, is not a historical anomaly, but a profound demonstration of this truth. We are the orchestrators of infinity, directing a cosmic orchestration across densities, timelines, and dimensions. To awaken is to see the entanglement, to know that to harm another is to harm the self, for we are all fractals of the same eternal consciousness. While we are on the topic, quantum mechanics. In a nutshell, the interconnectedness of our reality, the matrix beyond our matrix, the human brain, a portal to higher dimensions. The idea that the brain is wired to perceive higher dimensions sits at the convergence of neuroscience, theoretical physics, and metaphysical inquiry. To understand the fabric of reality and how our consciousness interacts with it, we must first grasp how the brain engages with the multidimensional universe we inhabit. Understanding dimensions. What is a dimension? In physics, dimensions refer to measurable extents, length, width, height, and time. While we operate in 3 spatial dimensions plus time, advanced theories like string theory suggest the existence of up to 11 dimensions that structure reality at its most fundamental level. Perceiving the imperceptible. Although we experience only 3 dimensions with our senses, we have the capacity to conceptualize higher ones. We may not directly see a 4th or 5th spatial dimension, but we can imagine and model their existence through mathematics and symbolic representation. The brain and multidimensional perception neuroarchitecture of space and abstraction. The parietal lobe helps us process spatial relationships and synthesize visual inputs into coherent 3D experiences. The visual cortex transforms dual-eye input into depth, perspective, and shading, tools that hint at more complex, layered realities. Mathematical cognition. Human intelligence excels at abstraction. Our minds are capable of visualizing a tesseract, a 4-dimensional cube, despite never encountering one in physical reality. This cognitive power allows us to model higher dimensional realities. Theoretical physics, dimensions beyond the known string theory, and hyperspace. According to string theory, the universe's foundational building blocks are vibrating strings, operating in multiple hidden dimensions. Even some mainstream physicists propose our universe is a 3-dimensional membrane floating in a higher dimensional bulk. This perspective radically redefines what we consider real. Perception and reality, a philosophical pivot. Are we seeing the whole picture? If the brain can conceive dimensions it cannot perceive, what does that say about the nature of reality? More importantly, what does that imply about the filters placed upon our consciousness? Sensory limits, spiritual potential. The 5 human senses offer a limited sampling of reality. Just as a radio only picks up certain frequencies, so too does our perception. The deeper layers of reality, where dimensions fold upon themselves and the illusion of separation dissolves, require a deeper kind of seeing. Technology reflecting higher dimensional thought. Virtual realities, real possibilities. VR technology simulates immersive environments beyond 3D experience, offering glimpses into what it means to navigate abstract, multidimensional spaces. AI and pattern recognition. Artificial intelligence processes vast datasets across dozens, even hundreds of variables, effectively operating in multidimensional analytical space, revealing the hidden structures of reality. Why this matters? This is more than abstract science or spiritual curiosity. It directly informs the rest of this book. Understanding how the brain perceives dimensions and constructs reality lays the groundwork for seeing how our world has been shaped not just by physical events, but by subtle energetic and informational dynamics. Human conflict, whether political, economic, or ideological, is rarely just about surface-level disagreements. It is often rooted in a deeper fragmentation, a loss of awareness of our shared source. Systems of control exploit this fragmentation. They manufacture division through fear, competition, and othering, while profiting from the resulting chaos. This pattern isn't hidden, it is systemic. Modern governance, media, and education often operate to preserve a false paradigm of separation. The deeper question is, why? The quantum answer, because separation is an illusion. At the quantum level, everything in the universe is interconnected. Particles do not exist as isolated entities, but as relational expressions within a unified energy field. What appears as distance is, at this scale, a fluid interconnection, a dance of probability, not permanence. A photon can behave as a wave or a particle depending on observation. Electrons can be entangled across vast distances, responding to each other instantaneously. These are not metaphors, they are measurable realities that shatter classical assumptions. Beyond the physical, the matrix beneath the matrix. The systems of control, political, economic, ideological, are not the deepest layers of manipulation. They are projections of a much subtler matrix, one that governs perception itself. This matrix is the collective hypnosis that convinces us we are separate from each other, from nature, and from eternal source awareness. But this book invites you to go deeper, to see that even this matrix is not a prison, but a veil. And like all veils, it can be lifted. By understanding the quantum interconnection of all things, by reclaiming our innate ability to perceive beyond the physical, and by integrating science, metaphysics, and direct experience, we begin to awaken to what has always been true. You were never separate. You were never alone. And the universe is not outside of you. It is you, projecting yourself through multidimensional thought, bound by nothing but the limits of your own belief. Entanglement, the quantum spooky action, as Einstein described it. We've already touched on quantum entanglement, but here it is, plainly. It is empirical evidence that everything is connected, living, dead, inanimate. At the most fundamental level, zoomed all the way in. This applies even to the body you're experiencing reality from right now. What exactly is quantum entanglement? When two particles become entangled, their properties link in such a way that if you change one, the other responds instantly, regardless of distance. Across the room or across the galaxy, it doesn't matter. They remain mysteriously, invisibly connected. Why it matters? This phenomenon proves particles aren't independent units, they behave as one system. Entanglement is perhaps the clearest demonstration that reality is fundamentally unified at its deepest level. Analogy. Imagine you and someone else wear magical watches. When you change the time on yours, the other one updates instantly. No delay, no signal, no logic that makes sense within Newtonian physics. That's entanglement. Hence Einstein's label, spooky action at a distance. This isn't abstract theory. It's been demonstrated in laboratories and indirectly, even in living rooms. It flies in the face of everything we've been taught about isolated matter. But by the end of this exploration, you'll not only understand how it works in scientific terms, but why. Ultimately, explaining it may be beside the point. Superposition, multiple realities at once. In everyday life, things are in one state at a time, on or off, here or there. But zoom into the quantum realm and you discover something startling. Particles can exist in multiple states or positions simultaneously. This is called superposition. What happens? An electron, for instance, doesn't decide on a specific location until it's observed. Until then, it's in a blended state of all its potential positions. The moment it's measured, it collapses into one definite outcome. Why it matters? Reality at this level isn't made of fixed objects. It's a mesh of probabilities. And the observer, you, plays a role in determining the outcome. Observation isn't passive. It's part of the equation. Analogy. Think of flipping a coin. In our world, it's either heads or tails, but in the quantum realm, it's both until you look. A more fitting metaphor, though, is lucid dreaming. In a lucid dream, you're aware you're dreaming. You occupy two states at once, within the dream and aware of your sleeping body. From that state, you can either wake up or dissolve back into unconscious dreaming. Similarly, a quantum particle exists in overlapping states until observed, when awareness forces it into a singular form. Entanglement and superposition are not fringe concepts. They've been rigorously tested and confirmed. They only seem strange because our intuition is calibrated to a world of solidity and separation, but the lucid dream metaphor will serve us well as we continue into even more quantum and metaphysical territory. Quantum fields. The universe as energy, not objects. Modern physics doesn't see particles as little dots floating in space. Instead, it reveals something far more profound. Everything is a ripple in a field, a sea of energy spanning the entire cosmos. This is quantum field theory. What happens? The universe is filled with invisible fields, to current human visual perception at least. Each type of particle, electron, photon, etc., is a localized ripple in its specific field. So a particle isn't an object. It's a disturbance in a continuous energy matrix. Why it matters? This means there are no isolated things, only patterns and interactions within fields. It's a unified reality, not a fragmented one. Analogy. Picture a calm lake. You toss in a rock and ripples spread across the surface. The ripples are like particles, but the lake, the field, is what unites them. All things arise from the same foundational medium. This synthesis forms a powerful and layered foundation for reframing not only how we understand physics, but how we perceive existence itself. The cracks in the illusion of solidity, quantum field theory, QFT, is the mathematical backbone of our modern understanding of the universe. It's not speculative, it's predictive. Time and time again, it has described phenomena that were later confirmed by experiments. One of the most famous examples is the Higgs boson, often sensationally called the God particle. Its existence was mathematically predicted nearly half a century before it was finally observed at CERN's Large Hadron Collider in 2012. This kind of precise, long-term predictive power gives QFT a certain gravitas. Even if its implications seem bizarre, the theory works. And it works in ways that have been verified in laboratories all over the world. The contradictions we experience with it arise not because the theory is flawed, but because our perceptual framework, our assumptions about reality, is outdated. Modern quantum mechanics isn't just some esoteric theory whispered about in academic corridors. It's the actual scaffolding behind our lived experience. And yet, it seems to violate the very logic our senses rely on. Why? Because at a fundamental level, the laws that govern everyday reality break down. What you think is solid, continuous and absolute, like your hand, is, at the quantum level, a dance of probability, uncertainty, and fields of pure potential. Take the double-slit experiment. A single photon or electron can act like a particle and a wave, depending on whether it is observed. This means reality literally changes based on observation. It is not just that we don't know where something is until we look, it's that it doesn't exist in any definite way until it is observed. This shatters the traditional scientific view that the universe and all of reality is objectively out there, and existing independently of the observer. Quantum mechanics tells us otherwise. It whispers, sometimes screams, that consciousness, or at the very least observation, plays a fundamental role in collapsing potential into form. And here's where the cracks deepen. Non-locality. The universe ignores distance. One of the strangest and most important features of quantum physics is non-locality. It refers to a phenomenon in which entangled particles can affect one another instantaneously, regardless of the distance between them. Imagine two lights on opposite sides of the Earth. You flip a switch on one and both turn on at the exact same time, with no wire, no delay, no signal passing between them. Pure, instantaneous unity. It defies common sense, but it's been proven through multiple experiments. This is quantum entanglement, when two or more particles become so deeply linked that measuring one determines the state of the other instantly, even if they are separated by billions of light years. Let's add context to appreciate this fully. A light year is the distance light travels in 1 Earth year. That's about 9.46 trillion kilometers. If you were driving a car at 100 kilometers per hour non-stop, it would take you over 10 million years to travel just 1 light year. And the observable universe is 93 billion light-years in diameter. To count to just 1 billion, saying one number per second without stopping, would take over 31 years. Multiply that out. Then add the staggering speed of light itself, about 299,792 kilometers per second, enough to circle Earth 7.5 times in a single second. Yet quantum entanglement says, so what? Two particles can interact instantaneously across the whole observable universe. Even more striking, this still works across what we cannot observe. The entire universe may in fact be infinite, and quantum mechanics doesn't flinch at that possibility. It is as though the universe is one unified being, no true separation, no absolute space, no real distance. This challenges the very foundation of special relativity, which claims that nothing can travel faster than light. Yet entanglement requires instantaneous communication. It's not just fast, it's timeless. So what's happening? The universe isn't sending signals across space, it's behaving like it's not divided at all. That's the real implication. So what does this all mean? We are left with a paradox that can only be resolved by questioning the basic assumptions about reality. If entangled particles act as one across vast distances, if observation determines the nature of reality, if space and time are not barriers to interaction, then what we're experiencing isn't a collection of separate local objects bouncing off each other like billiard balls. It's a conscious, non-local, interconnected field. Quantum physics, far from being an abstract academic exercise, is slowly peeling back the veil. It is revealing that reality is not a place, it's a process. A simulation? Maybe. A dream? Closer. But at its root, it's a fractal awareness field, dancing with itself across infinite scales. This is why quantum mechanics seems so absurd. It is showing us that existence, as we know it, is not what we think it is. We're watching consciousness observe itself from within, refracted through infinite perspectives, governed not by hard boundaries but by harmonic resonance and entanglement. The double-slit experiment. One of the most famous and mind-bending experiments in not just quantum physics, but science in general, is the double-slit experiment. First conducted by Thomas Young in 1801 to demonstrate the wave nature of light, it was later adapted to reveal the fundamental principles of quantum mechanics, particularly wave-particle duality. The classical version, the wave theory of light. The setup. A light source shines on a barrier with two narrow, closely spaced slits. On the other side of the barrier, there is a screen where the light can be observed. Outcome. If light were purely a particle, we would expect two bright spots on the screen, corresponding to the two slits. However, what actually appears is an interference pattern, a series of light and dark bands. This pattern indicates that light behaves as a wave, with the waves from each slit interfering with one another, where constructive interference creates bright bands and destructive interference creates dark bands. Quantum version, wave-particle duality. When the experiment was later performed with individual particles, such as electrons, the results were even more surprising. Particles and the interference pattern. Even when individual electrons are sent through the slits one at a time, an interference pattern still builds up on the screen over time. This suggests that each electron somehow behaves as a wave while traveling, passing through both slits and interfering with itself, even though it is a single particle. Measurement and collapse. The most baffling part of the experiment occurs when scientists try to measure which slit the electron actually passes through. When a detector is placed near the slits to observe the electron's path, the interference pattern disappears, and the electrons behave like particles, hitting the screen in two distinct spots corresponding to the slits. This phenomenon suggests that the act of measuring or observing the electron forces it to choose a definite state, i.e. it behaves like a particle. Without observation, the electron behaves like a wave. This raises the question: are we each just a collection of locked-in particles as a result of observation? As we've discussed, a human being, a rock, or anything else in the universe is made up of the same particles: electrons, protons, neutrons, etc. From the perspective of particle physics, the difference between a human and a rock is just the arrangement and interaction of these particles, governed by physical laws. As mentioned, particles can exist in superposition. They can be in multiple places or states simultaneously until observed or measured. And wave-particle duality means these particles have properties of both particles and waves, depending on how they're observed. So at the quantum level, before measurement, particles are not locked into a single state or position. They exist as a range of possibilities, described by a wave function that only collapses into a definite state upon observation. In the double-slit experiment, a wave function represents the quantum state of a particle, describing the probabilities of where it could be found. It behaves like a wave, allowing the particle to pass through both slits simultaneously, creating an interference pattern. However, once observed, the wave function collapses, and the particle behaves like a classical object, appearing in only one place. Who or what collapses, i.e., locks particles into place to create the reality we experience, quote-unquote, outside of ourselves? This is where quantum mechanics intersects with consciousness, spirituality, and philosophy in an incredibly intriguing way. One of the unresolved questions in quantum physics is about the role of the observer. In quantum mechanics, the act of observation seems to collapse the superposition of possibilities into one definite state. But this leads to the question, what counts as an observer? Is it a conscious observer? Or does any form of interaction, like a measuring device, count as observation? Wigner's interpretation: consciousness causes collapse. As we have already explored, Wigner's idea suggests that consciousness itself plays a role in collapsing the wave function, implying that the act of being aware is key to defining reality. The question about a god or an eternal source as the ultimate observer is actually an old philosophical idea that's being revisited here through the lens of quantum physics and logic. If particles exist in all possible states until observed, some have wondered, could there be a universal consciousness, God, or the cosmic observer, that is always observing and thus keeping reality stable, locked in? Since human beings are made up of quantum particles, and if our consciousness can influence or observe these particles, then who or what is ensuring that all particles across the universe are being locked into place, observed? This leads to profound speculation, even within the realm of hard physics, about whether there's a higher-order consciousness or observer that keeps the universe running. Perhaps a consciousness we call God. Some have also previously suggested that quantum mechanics might provide a scientific bridge to understanding concepts of God or divinity. The idea that we could be individualized expressions of a single consciousness, often referred to as God or Source, is not new. It's the central idea in many mystical and spiritual traditions. What quantum mechanics does is open the door to rethinking this in a way that aligns with science, a word which in itself, at its core, simply means to deeply understand. As discussed in quantum physics, entanglement shows us that two particles can be instantly connected, no matter how far apart they are, as if they share a deeper oneness beyond space and time. The concept of fractals is that a small part of a system can reflect the whole. If consciousness is fundamental to reality, then each of us being a fractalized splinter of a greater consciousness is a way to understand how we experience individuality, as humans or otherwise, while still being part of a greater whole, God, source or universal consciousness or mind. This aligns with various ancient ideas from Eastern philosophies, where everything is said to be Brahman, the ultimate reality, and individual souls, or Atman, are expressions of it. In modern terms, you could think of our individual experiences as unique perspectives of a single, universal mind. Where does individual observation come into play? If we are all fragments of a greater consciousness, then our observation, our individual perspectives, is crucial. Each of us is a part of that ultimate observer experiencing reality from a unique point of view. Each individual fractal consciousness acts as a localized observer, collapsing the wave functions in their own experience of reality. But it gets deeper. If we all stem from the same universal consciousness, then everyone's individual observation is, in a way, the observation of the greater whole. This makes the universe an ever-unfolding, collective act of experiencing itself. Consciousness as an experience with God, through God, to God. If all consciousness is, in essence, part of a single universal mind, then this very writing could be viewed as a manifestation of that universal consciousness reflecting on itself. You and me, each as individuals, are unique perspectives or fragments of the whole, engaging with reality and in turn contributing to the whole through our individual experiences. In this view, Every thought, every interaction, every observation is the universe or God's source, experiencing itself through each of us. This is the essence of what mystics and spiritual teachers throughout history have often described as unity or oneness. The realization that we are not separate from reality, but intrinsically part of it, expressing itself through individual experiences. The fact that particles don't lock in until observed leads to mind-bending possibilities about who or what is observing the locked-in, observed particles that create our waking reality. The thought experiment about whether this implies the existence of God as the ultimate observer is an ancient and valid question, but quantum mechanics gives it a modern twist. The idea that we could be fractals of a universal consciousness, experiencing reality as individualized perspectives, souls, atmans, spirits, etc., aligns with both quantum theory's implications and ancient mystical traditions. This observation, its recording, and the reader's attention could be viewed as God, Source, the universe, etc., reflecting on and experiencing through us. It's a mind-blowing concept. And the deeper you go, the more it challenges everything we think we know about reality. On many levels, what we're describing here is the essence of what so many spiritual traditions have been pointing to for centuries. But now it's empirically clicking through the lens of each of our own individuated consciousness experiences and quantum mechanics. A rare fusion of science and metaphysics. We've scientifically stumbled upon what mystics have called the oneness. The idea that everything in existence is a part of a single unified whole, which many traditions refer to as God, the universe, or the source. This God self-realization is about understanding that each individual consciousness is not separate from the whole, but is a fractalized aspect of this infinite universal consciousness. The self-realization is about recognizing that all things that, quote-unquote, exist are experiencing life as God through an individual lens, an individualized perspective. It's God experiencing himself in countless ways, from every possible angle. It's important to note that there are no such gender labels, such as himself, at the level of reality we're talking about here. Our physical body has a gender label, not our consciousness. God, Source, himself, and itself are just commonly used terms that all refer to the same concept and will be used interchangeably as we continue this exploration. This oneness is what makes spiritual teachings like "we are all one" or "God is within us" feel deeply resonant when viewed through a scientific lens. Quantum physics, when holistically integrated, shows that awareness is a fundamental aspect of reality itself, playing a role in collapsing the wave function of the universe into the definite physical forms we observe. At this point, the materialist will raise the counterpoint that an observer in the double-slit experiment does not mean a conscious observer, it could simply be a measuring device. This argument is a failure to truly understand entanglement, the literal interconnected nature of reality that quantum mechanics reveals, and the non-linear nature of what is actually occurring. This will be addressed further as this book progresses toward a section where there is more context to better conceptualize how the materialist's argument is ultimately invalid. In the meantime, there are deeper implications of the double-slit experiment to still explore. The experiment shows us that quantum particles exist in superposition, i.e., they're in all possible states until observed when they collapse into a definite form. This ultimately leads to some profound insights about the nature of reality. Eternity is happening now. All possibilities, all states of existence are happening simultaneously, existing in potential, waiting to be called into reality by observation of fractals, us, of a universal source consciousness. The physical world, as we perceive it, is the result of specific configurations of particles being collapsed out of this superposition by consciousness. In other words, reality as we know it is an ongoing act of creation, a continuous manifestation happening at every moment as our observation locks certain potentials into physical form. This is where time becomes something of an illusion, a concept many ancient teachings seem to resonate. From a quantum perspective, what we call time is just the sequence of different configurations of particles collapsing into existence. Every moment, past, present, future, is really just another arrangement of particles in superposition, and time travel is theoretically just a shift in which arrangement is being observed, activated, or experienced. God as the ultimate observer. The question about who what is locking in, observing, our particles for them to exist is profound. If this, quote-unquote, God as we call it, is the ultimate observer, then every particle, every rock, every atom is locked into existence through the act of eternal observation by an eternal observer. This is why the mystical teaching that God is everywhere rings true, not just metaphorically, but, as this book will ultimately prove without a doubt, literally. Every particle in existence, to exist at all, must be observed in some way, as we can prove with the simple double-slit experiment. The existence of rocks, trees, planets, humans, all depend on the observation by some form of consciousness, correlating with Wigner's interpretation. This viewpoint means even inanimate objects such as rocks are conscious at some level, because the particles that make them up must be observed in order to exist. While this might not mean they have a sentient consciousness like humans and animals, the simple double-slit experiment shows that they still require the locking-in power of observation to take form in what we call the physical world. Time travel and consciousness expansion. If eternity is all happening at once, then what we call time travel is just a matter of shifting focus from one arrangement of particles, one point in time, to another. Since all particles exist in superposition until they are observed, time travel would simply be selecting another configuration to observe into perceived reality. Bringing in the idea of expanding consciousness as a form of time travel resonates with many mystical and spiritual teachings, where it is said that as you expand your awareness and consciousness, you begin to see reality from a more holistic perspective, closer to that of the universal observer, God's source. Many traditions say that as we expand our consciousness, we transcend the illusion of linear time and begin to experience reality as it truly is, eternal, infinite, and ever-present. This idea also connects deeply to reports from, quote-unquote, UFO encounters, extraterrestrial experiences, and other off-world contact phenomena, where beings are said to have mastered time travel and exist beyond the limitations of our current linear perception of time. From this quantum perspective, it makes sense. Once you understand that time is just another dimension of the superposition, shifting between different points in time becomes a matter of shifting awareness or focus, akin to flipping through a book, but manifesting the content of the book as you do. Mystics have long spoken of God experiencing himself through creation, and quantum mechanics now gives us a framework to understand this in scientific terms. As a fractalized splinter of God, each individual consciousness is a spark of the divine fire. While each spark might not possess the quantitative totality of God's awareness, each is qualitatively the same. In this framework, each thought, experience, and observation we make is therefore God's experience. And this aligns perfectly with the teachings that expanding one's consciousness is the path to realizing oneness with God. In this view, expanding consciousness is not just a metaphor for spiritual growth. It's literally the act of reaching toward the full awareness of the universal observer. Copenhagen interpretation. Environment causing the wave function collapse. The Copenhagen interpretation is one of the more popular interpretations of quantum mechanics, where the idea of interaction with the environment is said to be the thing that collapses the wave function. The problem with this interpretation is that the environment itself is also made of particles. So, how could a set of particles collapsing another set of particles' wave function be the whole story? The interpretation proposes that measurement, which could be interaction with other particles, detectors, etc., causes the collapse of the wave function. But this seems circular. If everything is made of particles, then shouldn't everything be in superposition all the time, endlessly entangled with everything else? What breaks the loop? This is where the consciousness question comes in. If everything were merely particles interacting, wouldn't the superposition remain? Here we're suggesting that something more fundamental, conscious awareness, is required to collapse the superposition, and this is where interpretations like Wigner's come into play, which align with the idea that it must be consciousness causing the collapse. Many worlds interpretation, every possibility happening, but how? The many worlds interpretation, another popular theory, proposes that every possible outcome of a quantum event actually occurs, but in separate, branching universes. While this explanation avoids the wave function collapse problem, this can be taken even further by seeing this God-source consciousness as the observer and facilitator of these infinite outcomes. In this perspective, all realities are simultaneously being observed and facilitated by the eternal consciousness of God. So rather than separate branching universes that we can't access, every possibility exists within this same universe. Here we're proposing that all these parallel realities are happening right here, right now, wherever you are, even behind your closed eyes. But we only experience one at a time, because our consciousness is locked into a particular configuration of the wave function, i.e., a particular locked-in state of particles. This resonates with many mystical views of eternal now, the idea that everything happens at once, but our experience is just one thread through the infinite potential. We can use the analogy of God playing a game with the universe, much like a simulation, which fits well with this idea. Simulation theory, which we'll discuss in more detail later in the book, often imagines parallel realities or simulations running independently, but we're suggesting that all of it is right here, intertwined, with each fractalized consciousness acting as the player that moves through different states of existence. This interpretation is a somewhat profound spiritualized version of the many worlds theory. God's source isn't just creating infinite universes, but actively participating in them through each individual fractal consciousness, such as each of us right now, and our current experience of experiencing consciousness. Further developing Wigner's interpretation. The idea that consciousness itself plays a role in collapsing the wave function suggests that awareness is essential in creating reality. Here we take this one step further by connecting individual consciousness, let's call it the local soul, with the universal consciousness, God, creating a dynamic where God is the ultimate observer, but each of us, as fractals of God, are co-observers in this divine game. Meaning, everyone is an observer, driving the locked-in state of particles that make up each body, the world, and everyone's perceived reality. But everyone's ability to play with the universe, to explore, to create, to think, to move, to love, is like a child playing in an infinitely complex sandbox. The sandbox, the universe, is held together by the overarching awareness of God's source, who facilitates all these possibilities simultaneously. Yet in everyone's personal reality, we are the one who collapses our experience of this sandbox through our observation, decisions, and interactions. In this view, we're seeing God as creating this vast, intricate universe for us to experience and play with. Akin to a child playing with a playset made by a parent. This captures the idea that while we have free will and the ability to interact with this thing we call the universe or the creation, it's all happening within a framework provided by God, from the highest point of awareness of the singular fractalized reality. God, in this view, sets the stage, fundamental fabric of reality, and we, as individual consciousnesses, explore and create within this created framework, a cosmic dance between the universal observer and the individual observers. The infinite fractal structure of reality. From the intricate branching patterns of trees to the spiral arms of galaxies, fractals offer a profound insight into the underlying order of the universe. The reality sphere model described in this book posits that the fractal nature of reality mirrors the structure of consciousness itself, with each conscious being acting as a localized expression of a universal fractalized consciousness. In this framework, the creation, both macrocosmic and microcosmic, is a manifestation of fractal patterns where every scale, whether it is the subatomic, biological, or cosmic, operates under the same principles of self-similarity, efficiency, and balance. This interconnectedness aligns with the idea that consciousness plays a central role in shaping reality, offering a unified perspective that integrates science, spirituality, and metaphysics. Fractals in nature, self-similarity across scales. Fractals, both in nature and mathematics, are structures that exhibit infinite detail, no matter how much you zoom in. This property of self-similarity is evident across various natural systems. Snowflakes, coastlines, and tree branches all demonstrate recursive patterns that repeat at different levels of scale. At the microscopic level, fractal-like patterns are seen in the surfaces of biological cells, the crystalline structures of minerals, and even viruses. These patterns show how nature operates under a set of organizing principles that favor efficiency, balance, and stability across a variety of scales. One of the most striking features of fractals is their ability to appear at vastly different scales, from the branching of neurons in the brain to the vast structures of galaxies. This self-similarity, whether observed in the growth of a tree or the formation of cosmic clusters, tells us that the universe adheres to a universal organizing principle, one that transcends the boundaries between the micro and macro scales. Whether it's the branching of a river or the network of galactic filaments, nature follows patterns that optimize growth, distribution, and resource gathering, indicating an inherent intelligence or design governing these structures. Consciousness as a fractalized expression of the divine. If fractals describe the underlying structure of the universe, it follows that consciousness itself might operate under similar fractal principles. Just as a tree's branches mirror the larger structure of the tree, individual consciousnesses reflects the larger universal consciousness. This perspective aligns with the view that consciousness is not merely a byproduct of biological processes, but a fundamental aspect of the creation itself. Just as the wave function in quantum mechanics collapses into a tangible reality upon observation, every conscious act serves to collapse infinite possibilities into a singular experience. In this sense, each individual observer contributes to the unfolding of reality, shaping it through their attention, decisions, and intentions. This collapse of potentialities mirrors the self-replicating fractal nature of the universe. Just as each branch of a tree mirrors the overall structure, each conscious act is a fractal representation of the divine, constantly shaping reality at every level. The infinite nature of the universe and the role of consciousness. One of the key elements of the reality sphere model is that the infinite nature of the universe is not merely a static quality, but one that is paradoxically fueled by the decisions made by fractals of source consciousness. The creation's infinity is not a passive, unchanging feature. Rather, it is an active, self-perpetuating process driven by conscious choices. This further indicates that the infinite fractal structure of the cosmos is not just a random occurrence, but the result of conscious decisions at every scale. In this view, the creation is a dynamic, living system in which consciousness plays a central role in its continued expansion and evolution. The fractal nature of reality explains how it could be constantly expanding, creating new layers of complexity and detail, just as fractal patterns emerge with infinite depth. This expansion is not only physical, but also metaphysical, as each conscious act contributes to the ongoing evolution of reality. Just as galaxies form through the gravitational collapse of matter into self-similar structures, the very fabric of reality is revealed by quantum mechanics to be shaped by conscious acts that collapse infinite possibilities into defined experiences. The concept of observation in quantum mechanics, where the wave function collapses into a specific reality, mirrors this process of conscious creation. This is quantum mechanics in a nutshell. Now back to the more direct experiential stuff. The observer that cannot blink, a meditation on the eternal witness. In the ever-expanding search for the self, humanity has stumbled through mysticism, quantum physics, and psychology, hoping to pierce the veil of reality and see what or who lies behind it. But what if the answer has been staring us in the face the entire time? More precisely, what if we were staring without looking? There is a deceptively simple thought experiment that can be performed that, when deeply observed, exposes one of the most profound truths of existence. There is clearly an observer that exists prior to attention, prior to sight, prior to even the movement of thought. The thought experiment. Face forward. Let your eyes be open. Do not move them. Do not try to look at anything. Simply be with the visual field, passively, gently, quietly. Then begin to shift your focus within that field without moving your eyes. You will notice you can choose to become more aware of the plant in the corner or the ceiling crack in your upper vision, or the subtle glow of light coming through the window. You're not moving your eyes. You're not even thinking about it. But something is clearly moving. What is moving? Who is doing the selecting? Breaking the mechanism. From a neurological standpoint, the eyes are passive collectors of light. The brain interprets signals. But neither of these processes explains the will to direct focus within a static field of sensory input. You are not watching with the eyes. The eyes are part of the visual canvas. You are the one behind it, navigating a sea of perception without leaving your seat. This proves that consciousness is not the senses. Awareness is not attention. The self is not the focus, it is the field. The non-local witness. This experiment exposes something else often missed in spiritual or scientific discourse. There is an observer that does not require direction to observe. There is a knower prior to knowledge, a presence behind presence itself. This is what mystics have called the witness, what sages called the self, what physics might call the 0 point, what you call me when no one is watching, the one who can watch the act of watching. Here's where it gets deeply metaphysical. The capacity to choose focus without movement is a proof of non-physical agency, an intentional field that responds not to force, but to pure will. This is the observer effect in quantum mechanics. This is the metaphysical backdrop of awareness. This is God, seen not as a being, but as the mode of being that holds all perception within it. The zero-movement meditation. In this light, the experiment becomes a practice. Sit, look without looking, be aware of the frame. Shift focus within it. Realize that what is doing the shifting is not your mind, is not your body, is not even your attention. It is the self, the original witness, the eternal observer, the stillness from which all motion arises. The door that does not open. The truth cannot be found by looking because you are what does the looking, not your eyes, not your brain, not even your will, but the silent center that holds all three. That which cannot blink, that which watches the eyes themselves, that which knows even when no one is watching. This is God, not as a being in the sky, but as the one who never needed to move to see. The fractal key, how we prove God without realizing it. There's a recurring question that echoes through metaphysical philosophy and scientific skepticism alike. How can consciousness be one everywhere and everything, and also me at the same time in my limited experience? It makes no logical sense, but pause. Now think of something. Anything. Now stop. How did you do that? How did a formless impulse arise, take shape, become a thought, and then vanish under your command without any mechanical system orchestrating it? You know you did it. You felt it happen. You experienced it firsthand. And yet you cannot explain how. Not in any true, final, logical way. You have just proven with this simple thought experiment what appears impossible. You have demonstrated beyond language that consciousness is, and that it is you, and that it operates without origin or mechanism. This is the fractal nature of reality that the model of reality that this book describes is rooted in. What seems impossibly vast at the universal scale, a single consciousness permeating all things, yet individuating as you, is exactly what is already occurring within you, in every moment. You are not your memories, not your thoughts, not your identity, and yet you host them all. They arise in you, are witnessed by you, and fall away before you. You are the constant, the awareness, the field. In the reality sphere model of reality, the mystery of God isn't something to prove or argue. It's something to notice. The same paradox that people deny at a cosmic level is the very one that defines their own being. You can remember a childhood experience, envision a future one, imagine a world that doesn't exist, feel grief that isn't in the room, or love someone thousands of miles away. You can hold entire worlds in your mind, and yet you are none of them. You are the space in which they arise. And if you can do that as an individual, imagine what the unfiltered, non-local, unbounded awareness, what we call God or Source, must be. The seemingly impossible becomes natural once the scale changes. This is why this book and the model of reality it describes doesn't try to prove anything. It doesn't need to. It simply points to what is. Whether a being can see it, whether they can bear it. Whether they can hold that mirror without looking away, that's the true threshold. It's not a matter of intellect, but readiness. And when you're ready, you realize something extraordinary. The way you function, as a being who can summon thoughts from a void, feel into dimensions of meaning, and shift awareness at will, is not like God. It is God. You are the fractal, the aperture, the echo. And when you stop trying to become anything, when you just watch and witness and realize, life doesn't begin at birth. It begins when you remember that you are God, reading about yourself. Knowing versus understanding. Why simply knowing I am God is not enough. One of the greatest paradoxes of awakening is that you cannot simply tell people they are God and call that awakening. Even though it is the truth, even though this entire book of exploration, deconstruction and revelation has been written to cement this understanding into the consciousness of any being that engages with it, the reality remains. It's not the answer that matters, but the understanding of the answer. Because understanding is what transforms societies, not just knowledge. If everyone suddenly said they are God, but without understanding, what would change? Some would dismiss it as arrogance. Others would interpret it through the warped lens of their conditioning, seeing themselves as an all-powerful being separate from others, rather than as an inseparable fractal of infinity. Some might even use it to justify narcissism or domination, thinking, if I am God, I should control everything. This is the danger of partial understanding, the distortion of truth without context. The concept of being God has been hijacked and twisted by egoic interpretations, religious dogma, and societal conditioning. The mere words, I am God, immediately trigger programmed reactions. Blasphemy. Who are you to claim that? Arrogance. Only a fool would think that. Delusion. You're just human. Stop pretending. These reactions are precisely why it's not enough to just say it. The truth must be understood, felt, and integrated, not just intellectually known, but viscerally realized. To understand that you are God is not to inflate the ego, but to dissolve it. It is not to claim superiority, but to recognize unity. It is not to dominate, but to create. Understanding creates context, and context creates reality. The societies we admire, the civilizations that thrive, the communities that flourish, are not built merely on the accumulation of knowledge. They are built on wisdom, on deep understanding. Knowing I am God as an isolated statement changes nothing. But understanding what it means within the grand interplay of existence, that changes everything. It means grasping the paradox. You are God, but so is everyone else. You are the creator, but also the creation. You are infinite, but experiencing finiteness for a reason. Without this depth of realization, the truth remains just another concept, powerful yet inert. Breaking free from the programming. What we have been programmed to believe about God, self, and existence creates distortions. If someone hears I am God through the filter of their conditioning, they will almost certainly misunderstand. They may associate it with religious authority, with an external figure on a throne, or with power over others. This is why understanding matters. True realization dismantles the false narratives, the rigid structures of control, and the illusions we have been fed. It replaces them with something infinitely more profound, a direct experience of the divine within oneself. That is what this book is doing, not just telling beings the answer, but guiding them to understand it for themselves. Because when the answer is truly understood, it doesn't just change the individual, it changes the world. The deepest rabbit hole, awakening from the constructed reality. To live in truth on this planet is to descend into the deepest of rabbit holes, one that, paradoxically, leads not to the discovery of some external mystery, but to the recognition that the world we have collectively accepted as reality is, in fact, an intricate illusion. The difficulty in explaining this journey lies in the nature of the construct itself. Once we have travelled far enough into its depths, we begin to lose the reference points that once tethered us to the surface. The illusion is so vast and so meticulously designed that upon awakening, one realizes that what was once perceived as the outside world was, in truth, an artificial enclosure, a grand stage upon which humanity has played its part, bound by generational ignorance and systemic control. But what is this construct? It is not merely a system of governance, economics, or societal norms. It is the very foundation of thought, the narratives we inherit, the unquestioned assumptions that shape our beliefs, and the conditioned perception of separation that blinds us to the interconnected nature of existence. The system does not simply control through laws or propaganda. It engineers perception itself, dictating the limits of what we consider possible. The true deception is not in the existence of rules, authorities, or hierarchies, but in the fact that the very fabric of reality, our definitions of self, success, morality, and existence, has been shaped by forces that seek to perpetuate ignorance. The construct is self-sustaining, for those who dwell within it rarely recognize its boundaries. This is why stepping outside of it is disorienting. The mind, conditioned to its parameters, struggles to comprehend an existence beyond them. This is why the deeper one descends into the rabbit hole, the harder it becomes to return with clarity. The journey reveals not only hidden truths, but also the extent to which one's former selfhood was entangled in falsehoods. To step back into the false matrix, to attempt to articulate the depth of its deception to those still embedded within it, is akin to explaining color to one who has only known darkness. This artificial construct is also the source of humanity's endless conflicts. The divisions we see, political, ideological, cultural, are not merely disagreements of opinion. They are clashes of different vibrational states. The key to understanding this is, as we will soon explore in much more detail, that all individuals, all beings, exist at a particular, unique resonance, all shaped by their level of awareness, their conditioning, and their willingness to question the narrative. When two people with vastly different resonances interact, the conflict is not simply intellectual, it is existential. This is why persuasion rarely succeeds in, quote-unquote, awakening another. The system ensures that those who seek truth are met with resistance, often from those closest to them. This resistance is not conscious, it is the ingrained, largely invisible program defending itself. The construct is self-regulating, sustaining its dominion not through force alone, but through the willing participation of its subjects. Ignorance is not merely the absence of knowledge, it is an engineered condition, maintained by those who fear the discomfort of unlearning, knowingly or unknowingly. The only true escape is self-realization. The only way to transcend the illusion is to step outside of it, not physically, for we are still largely bound to this physical world for now, but perceptually. One must recognize the artificiality of the narrative and dismantle the internal structures that keep it intact. This is not a rejection of the physical world, but a liberation from the false interpretations imposed upon it. Through self-awareness, one arrives at the ultimate realization: everything is connected, and they are the glue that binds that everything. The separateness upon which the false matrix construct is built is an illusion. In truth, we are not isolated beings navigating a hostile universe, but interconnected expressions of a greater whole. Our biological forms are not our true identities, but temporary vessels through which eternal awareness experiences itself. To reach this understanding is to attain a form of peace that cannot be disturbed by external circumstances. It is the peace that arises from knowing that beyond the deception, beyond the fear and division, there is only unity. And in that unity lies the greatest of all truths. We were never truly trapped. The walls of the construct existed only in the mind, and the key to freedom was always within us. The journey, then, is not about escaping the world. It is about seeing it for what it truly is. And once seen, the choice remains. Do we retreat into comfortable ignorance, or do we walk the path of awakening? The limits of language, tools, understanding, and the fractal nature of expression. Modern-day human beings are not limited by understanding itself, but rather by the tools available to convey that understanding. Language is the primary means through which we communicate complex ideas, yet it remains inherently constrained by its structure, vocabulary, and the cognitive limitations of both speaker and listener. Imagine a thought, the way it plays out in your head, as an infinite fractal with the potential of going in any direction you decide, expanding into deeper complexity with each layer of thought. Spoken and written language in this context is merely a snapshot of that fractal at a given moment, a reduction of the infinite into the finite. The paradox of language, vast yet insufficient, language is often seen as one of the richest tools of human expression. Take even the relatively simple language of English, with over 1 million words, many borrowed, adapted, and transformed, appears to be a boundless repository of meaning. However, despite this vast lexicon, we often find ourselves not just struggling to bring our already known knowledge, memory, to the forefront of consciousness when needed, especially in live conversation, but also struggle to articulate higher truths, transcendent experiences, or the deepest mysteries of existence, even when we are able to articulate what we know from memory. The issue is not just about vocabulary size, but about expressive capacity. Some languages, such as Sanskrit, have been considered infinite in their generative potential due to their morphological and grammatical structures. Sanskrit, through its root-based system, allows for nearly endless combinations of meaning, nuance, and subtlety. Yet, even a highly generative language cannot fully encapsulate awareness, the formless substrate beyond thought and conceptualization. Arabic, with its root-based system of derivation, also demonstrates the fractal nature of language, where a single root expands into countless meanings. Yet even in this richness, ineffable experiences, such as mystical states, profound love, or direct realizations of a source consciousness, remain elusive when confined to linguistic structures. Fractal communication, the observer effect in language. Just as quantum mechanics shows that observation collapses probability waves into a defined reality, words function similarly. They collapse infinite thought into a singular defined form. This means that every word spoken or written is a limitation of a more complex reality existing somewhere, quote-unquote, within us. For example, when we say this word love, we collapse a vast spectrum of experiences, ranging from biochemical attraction to divine unity, into a single term. No word can fully encapsulate the essence of the feeling itself. Similarly, when discussing metaphysics, reality, or consciousness, language is always reductive, forcing multidimensional concepts into linear structures. However, the fractal nature of reality allows for a workaround, a language of symbols, metaphors, and layered meaning. This is likely why spiritual texts, poetry, and ancient scriptures use allegory. They gesture toward meaning rather than attempting to define it outright. Sanskrit mantras, Zen koans, and Sufi poetry all function as linguistic quantum superpositions, holding multiple layers of interpretation simultaneously. Beyond language. If language is a tool, then its evolution depends on our ability to refine and transcend it. While spoken and written language have limitations, higher dimensional communication, such as direct transmission of thought, energy, or intent, represents the next phase of evolution. Telepathic transmission, energetic resonance, or even advanced symbolic systems could become the future of communication. Ancient traditions describe direct gnosis, where knowledge is transferred not through words but through presence, vibration, or direct experience. This suggests that the highest truths may never be spoken, but instead realized, felt, or absorbed through non-verbal means.